Together we create possible. Together we create possible.
Hello and welcome to the channel podcast for young epilepsy. My name is Annie and I'm a young rep for the charity, which means I live with epilepsy every day and can relate to some of the things you might be going through. On today's podcast, we are interviewing Sammy. She's the Deputy Chief Executive at SUDEP Action. SUDEP stands for Sudden Unexpected Death in Epilepsy. SUDEP Action gives support to people living with epilepsy, like lifestyle and medical advice, such as their seizure safety checklist. They also support families who have had a death in their family. Sammy is here with the channel to explain exactly what SUDEP is, who is at risk, ways to be smart with your medication, and how you can get support from the people around you, as well as some amazing online resources.
Hi, Annie. It's great to be on. Thank you so much for having me and thank you for the introduction. As Annie rightly said, I'm Sammy from SUDEP Action and it's great to talk to you today. Hopefully we'll be able to bust some myths. Hopefully we'll be able to give you some information that might be really useful about SUDEP and about risks and some really positive things that you can do to understand your risks and to see what you can do about them. I'm really looking forward to today's chat.
Thanks, Sammy. So I was going to start off with a question I think everybody has, and it's who tends to be most at risk of SUDEP?
That's a great question, Annie, and actually it's one I get asked an awful lot and it's actually quite a tricky one to answer. So I'm going to do my best, but it's probably not going to give the clear-cut answer that people might be looking for. It can be really misleading, I think, to kind of categorize people with epilepsy as either high risk or low risk. As we know from a lot of research that people's risks can change over time and quite significantly change over time depending on what's going on in their life. So if they're really stressful, if they're having lots of life changes, if they're maybe not looking after themselves well, their risks can go up and down quite quickly. And that's why we recommend it's really important to learn about what's a risk for you, when it might be changing, keeping an eye on it, so that you can kind of know when you might be personally more at higher risk, rather than kind of going, right, I've ticked 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 off on this list, so therefore I must be at high risk. I think it's really important. And that's why we also recommend that people with epilepsy have regular reviews with their health professional, because they'll know them and their epilepsy really well. Hopefully you'll have a really good relationship with them and they'll be able to know when things might be going off kilter or actually when things are going really well for you and be able to offer you advice and help and support if things are going a little bit awry. So it doesn't really answer your question, but it very much depends on individual people as to whether they're going to be more at risk or less at risk from SUDEP and their wider epilepsy risks.
Okay, so you mentioned different risks then. So what kind of risk factors would increase the chance of SUDEP?
That's a really good question as well. So we know, again, from lots of research that's gone on in this area, that there are quite a few risk factors linked with SUDEP, but also linked with kind of putting you more at risk from having epilepsy. And one of the main things, one of the main risks to be aware of is if you're having active seizures. So if you're actually just having seizures that aren't controlled by your medication, the more of them you have, the more at risk you might be, because it generally means you've got trickier to control epilepsy, either that or you're not looking after the epilepsy as well as it could be. We know that certain types of seizures, like a generalized tonic-clonic seizure or seizures you have when you're asleep, which I know are sometimes called nocturnal seizures, they've been linked to an increased SUDEP risk. But there's an awful lot we still don't know about SUDEP, and it's important to remember that. So this doesn't mean that people who are having other types of seizures are at low risk. It just means we know that those types of seizures currently put people potentially at a higher risk. And especially, we also know that if you're having active seizures, you're still having seizures, whether it's one a day, one a week, one a year, that can put you at risk of other things as well, like injuries or accidents, drowning, all those sorts of things. So we want to do the best we can to try and reduce those seizure risks. Because of this, another risk factor to be really well aware of is making sure that you're taking your epilepsy medication regularly as your doctor or nurse has prescribed it for you. That's such a good way of managing or trying to lower your risks of SUDEP by taking that medication as well as you can and making sure that you're on the best medication for you, which is what your epilepsy clinician can hopefully help you with. There are other things to also be aware of that can impact on your seizures, your well-being, and put you more at risk. Things like drinking alcohol, taking recreational drugs, pregnancy, having a learning disability, or not attending your epilepsy appointments. Some of these things are things that are going to be in your control, that you're going to be able to do things about. Other things it's just important to be aware of, that actually, if you've got a few other risks, you probably need to keep them in mind and see what you can do to reduce them. Speaking to your health professional can really help with that.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you say about like more seizures might lead to it, especially because like when you're first being diagnosed, you don't have your tablets. I know I was having quite a few seizures, and some parents and guardians might be thinking that. So, what would then the best steps be to take if you think you're at a high risk of SUDEP?
Well, first off, I think it's really important to know that there are often things that you can do to live safely and to live really well with epilepsy. I know this is a really heavy thing to talk about today when we're discussing SUDEP and all that that can lead to, but there's often lots of positive steps that people with epilepsy can take to get their seizures under control and also to try and reduce their risks as much as they can for them. Um, and I think talking about it openly and honestly with yourself, with other people, with your epilepsy clinician, that's a really important first step, because then you can see what positive actions you can take to reduce them. Learning what might be a risk for you and keeping an eye on those risks over time is another really proactive thing that people can do to try and kind of understand those risks and lower them where you can, because it can give you some knowledge. It can make you feel more confident in kind of, right, okay, I know that this is a problem for me at the moment. I'm going to put some steps in place to try and lower them. And that can be really helpful and really confident, build your confidence in kind of looking at these risks in more of a, right, I can tackle it way rather than I'm really worried about it way. So I suppose hand in hand with learning about what might be a risk for you, it's also about then speaking to your doctor and nurse about it. So whether it's an epilepsy specialist or whether you're under the care of a GP or whoever it is that looks after your epilepsy, being really honest with them about your lifestyle and your epilepsy treatment and how you're feeling generally as well is really important, because if they know all the facts about what's going on in your life, they can then offer some really helpful advice and support to help you get the best seizure control possible for you and to help you reduce any risks you might have. So if you know that you're a little bit forgetful taking your medication, be really honest with your clinician about that, because then they can put some steps in place to try and help you, support you with that, and help your family members support you with that. If they don't know, they're not able to help, and that could put you in a really tricky, dangerous situation. So honesty and openness is really important. It's also, if you speak to your health professionals, if you're worried that you might be at high risk as well, they'll be able to help you with that anxiety and answer any questions and worries you might have. So it's really important to have that conversation if you've got a clinician that you're able to do that with.
Yeah, I think what you say about being honest with like your clinician like is really important because yeah, at the end of the day they know best and they'll be able to point in the right direction. I know I've had to admit things in the past to my various doctors about not being the best at remembering tablets and that when I was younger, and yeah, they're really good at advice and helping out.
Absolutely, they're on your side. So the more open and honest you can be with them, the more helpful they can hopefully be with you and offer you tips and advice that they've learned over their years of supporting people with epilepsy. But they can also then maybe point you in the direction if you need specialist support, say for your mental health, if that needs a little bit of extra help, they can maybe point you in the right direction as to who can help you, link you up with the right services. But they can only do that if they know. So that's a really important step to do. And yeah, it can be really tricky to be open and honest about things that maybe you're not that happy with yourself, but it's such an important step in learning what you can about your risks and then taking that positive action against them.
So once you've got older, everyone's thinking about next steps like moving out or going to university. When you're trying to gain more independence like that, what can be done then to help reduce the risks of SUDEP? Are there any changes you need to think about?
Absolutely. Another really important question, and something that it can be worrying for a lot of people and a lot of families, particularly as young people with epilepsy are gaining independence, as it's a lot of change at this time of people's life. I'm sure young epilepsy have some brilliant advice on how to prepare for big life changes like going away to university. So absolutely have a look on the website and check out pages that they've got to help. And I think when it comes to thinking about living safely when you're going through a big change, like going to university, moving out into your own house, just gaining more independence in your life, I think it's really important to have a plan in place before that change happens, and make sure that the basics of your epilepsy care really try and stay as similar and the same as possible. So, for example, making sure you can easily collect your epilepsy prescription, absolute fundamental. If you like, figuring out how you can make sure you're taking that with you if you are going to a new area, moving into a new university. So do you need to register with a GP or a pharmacy at that university, or are you going to collect that prescription when you go back home? These are the sorts of the things you need to be thinking about and putting plans in place before you make that new exciting move. It's really important, because as we talked about earlier, making sure you're taking that medication regularly and as prescribed is so important. So you've got to do a bit of planning ahead if you're doing these big life changes. If you're, as we said, also a little bit forgetful at taking your medication, make sure you plan ahead. Can you put some reminders in your phone to arrange when you need to go and put that new prescription in, or when you need to go and collect that new prescription? It's so easy when you head off to Freshers Week to forget and what you're meant to be doing. Time flies, there's lots of fun going on around you and new lectures, new friends. So you really need to plan ahead and make sure you've got those reminders in your phone so that you can get the boring life admin done, as well as having all these new adventures. Some universities are really great as well, or in some areas where around the country with different health teams, they have someone who can be a specific kind of point of contact for people with epilepsy at that university. So might be worth having a look to see, is there someone at that university who's responsible for looking after and just offering that bit of support to people who have a long-term health condition? If they do, then they might be able to offer advice on kind of what you might want to think about, how you can get registered with different services, and they can just be someone that you could go to when you're in this new setting, who can become a bit familiar and help you with keep those routines similar. I suppose a couple of other things to think about is, it sounds a bit boring when you want to kind of be launching yourself into new lectures or launching yourself into a new life, living on your own. But trying to get into a regular routine as quickly as you can is really important. It's probably going to be a very different routine to what you're used to, particularly if you've moved out of home and you've had your parents around to kind of lend a hand with reminders and making sure everything's up to date for you. But simple things like getting good sleep, eating well, eating regularly, taking your medication at the right times, doing what you can to manage your stress and your anxiety. These things can really help keep your epilepsy under control at a time when everything else is new and exciting and very, very different, which can sometimes for some people be enough to send epilepsy off kilter. So trying to keep those boring fundamentals kind of as steady as possible can really help make sure that you can enjoy this new period of your life, rather than feeling like your epilepsy is getting in the way. If you have specific triggers as well for your seizures, you might want to plan as to how you could manage them, but that will be very different for different people. So that's something to kind of think about if you know you have specific triggers. And just a couple of last things, I suppose, if you can, try and let the people around you know that you have epilepsy, so that they can support you and be there for you if you happen to have a seizure and you do need some help. And I know this can be incredibly worrying. When you're making new friends, how are they going to react? How are they going to feel? Are they going to think about you differently? But on the flip side of that, it can also really give them confidence. If you do have an unexpected seizure in front of them and they know nothing about it, they're going to be very unprepared. Whereas if you've had a conversation, hopefully they can lend a hand, and they can also support you with all of those routine changes that you need to kind of get under control as well. So it could work as a really positive benefit by having that open conversation. And the last thing I'd say, for as a bit of advice for people moving out to university or having a big life change, is really don't forget about your epilepsy appointments if you've got them scheduled in. So whether you're going back home to have them or whether you're having them in your new area, make sure you remember when they are, have them in your diary, make sure you're having that point of contact with your epilepsy clinician, because that can be really important. So just keep an eye, is everything all right? How's everything going? Do you need to tweak your medication slightly? Can they offer you any advice if things are changing for your epilepsy or for your well-being? It can be a really important kind of little touch point in your life of just checking in that everything's okay amongst all the exciting stuff that's going on around you. So definitely don't forget those appointments.
To add to what you were saying about routine as well, one thing I found when I was moving into college and then again, just like after moving out of home, I definitely started using alarms more, which might sound really silly, but as your routine in life starts changing, especially on the evenings, you're busy revising and you just kind of might forget to take your medication or take it late and kind of throw everything off. So from a personal experience, I recommend that as well if you tend to be a bit forgetful like myself.
Great tip, absolutely. And it might be that you find other people who have other health conditions around you as well when you start opening up about it, and they might have some really great self-management tips as well that they can lend you, or they can be your alarm if you forget to set them yourself as well. So yeah, great tip, Annie.
So, recent data from the Epilepsy 12 audit has suggested that only 53% of children and young people have evidence of ever having received information on SUDEP. Do you know why this number might be so low?
Good question. For those who don't know, Epilepsy 12 is an audit tool for epilepsy health professionals who support children and young people with epilepsy. It asks lots of questions about epilepsy services, about the care that's provided, about the information that's provided, and its main aim is to help health teams across the country to understand what they're doing well and where things could be done better. So to answer your question about why it's only just over half of children and young people who have noted in their records that they've had information being given to them about SUDEP, sadly, we know that this is quite common for people with epilepsy and across all ages, so not just young people, but we know that this is a problem that's gone on for a long, long time. And it's something that SUDEP Action has been fighting to change since we started over 25 years ago. We want this information to get out there because if people aren't told about it, they're not able to have these really important conversations like we're having today. And that's why we do all we can to support health professionals to have those conversations. I think a glimmer of hope, while 53% doesn't sound very much, that these figures are improving year on year, and actually more and more people are finding out this information, are being told this information, and are getting what they need to start thinking about their risk and what they can do. It's not happening quick enough, but it is getting better. And thankfully, we know that there are many health professionals out there that are keen to make sure children and young people and adults with epilepsy are told about SUDEP and epilepsy risks early on in their epilepsy journey. And this is really important because how can you make the best decisions for you and your epilepsy if you don't know all the facts? So I'm hoping that quite a few people out here who are listening today have been told about this before and they're not hearing about it for the first time. But if you are one of the people who are hearing about this for the first time and you do have loads of questions, please do speak to your epilepsy health professional about it, and also to go to some of the links that are going to be provided alongside this podcast and start this journey yourself, and then ask your health professional to give you more information because they really should be able to.
Kind of related to that. So often we have a bad habit of going to Google to answer any questions we might have, but I think we all know that's not always the most reliable source of information. So if SUDEP information hasn't been given to you by your clinician, where is the best place to try and get some?
Absolutely, relying on Google, etc., for your answers is only going to send you down a path of probably increasing your anxiety. It will give you some good information, but you're also going to know what information you can and can't trust. So I think if you're hearing some of these things about SUDEP for the first time or want to know a bit more generally, head to the SUDEP Action website. That's one place you can go. So we've got a whole section dedicated to epilepsy risks on our website and how you can manage them. It's all based on the latest evidence, so it's underpinned by something that's trusted and truthful. So head there as a bit of a starting point. I'd also recommend, again, I know I sound a bit like a broken record, but chatting to your epilepsy doctor or nurse about this as well. They will know the information that you need to know appropriate for you. They'll also be able to hand out leaflets and point you in other directions as well. It can, as you said, Annie, it can be really tempting to just head to Google, type in SUDEP and start scrolling. But a trusted source of information is really important on topics like this, so you don't get the wrong information, you don't send yourself down the wrong path when it comes to looking after yourself and doing the best you can for your epilepsy. You might want to give our EPSMON app a try as a part of your risk journey. It's a free to download app, and it helps you to keep an eye on your epilepsy risks and to learn about them by answering some simple yes no questions. It's based on research again, like the information on our website, and it gives you everything you need to understand what might be a risk for you and what you can do to kind of reduce those risks and to take action against them. So that could be another starting point to go to. And hopefully there'll be a few other links that will pop under the podcast that you can kind of have a look at to set you off on the right track, to get that starter bit of information that you know at least what questions you need to be asking or what things you might be able to start doing yourself to try and reduce those risks that you might have.
It's really good to know there's like a really simple app you can go to there, I think, with like times changing and things. That's would be a really good starting point for people who might not have an appointment easily accessible straight away with a doctor or clinician. That's really good to know.
Absolutely. That's why we created it. We know that it can be an awfully long time in between epilepsy appointments. So what do you do in the meantime? And our EPSMON app is there just to lend a bit of a hand and to kind of give you that nudge every now and then to go, have you thought about your risks for a while? Like, we just need to keep that touch point in, because as I said right at the start of this podcast, risks can change over time. So EPSMON's there just to kind of help you see if that change is happening. And if so, give you that nudge to do something about it. It's not the flashiest of apps, and we've got great ideas as to how we'd love to make it more useful. We'd also love feedback on it. So if people have ideas as to what would make it more useful for them, please do let us know, because I'd love to know how we can make our next version of the app even better for people so that they're using it for the risk bit, but also hopefully for other parts of their epilepsy care.
Ooh, I might take a look at that and get back to you.
Great, please do.
So a lot of people with epilepsy that have seizures often have turned to wearable technology for support in knowing when a seizure might be on its way. How effective is wearable technology at reducing the risk of SUDEP?
This is another one of those questions that I get asked a lot, particularly when I go out as part of my role. I do training sessions with health professionals, and this is a question that often comes up there. There are so many, as you may have seen, so many flashy devices out there, and it could be really confusing to know which one might help, if any. At the moment, there isn't a device that has available that has proven to be preventative of SUDEP, which is why we think it's really important to consider all the things we've talked about today as by reducing your wider risks. So making sure you're taking your medications and controlling your seizures as much as you can, getting that good routine, reducing your alcohol intake, all those sorts of things. Hopefully you'll be able to avoid reaching the point where you actually even need a watch or a monitor or an alarm to call for help when you have a seizure. We'd love to get to the point where people with epilepsy don't reach that crisis point, so don't hopefully need one of these alarms, rather than relying on the alarm to start shouting when something bad happens. But at the same time, we know that for some people, these devices can really give you peace of mind, and they can really be helpful in kind of getting that early intervention if something does go a little bit wrong with the seizures. So they do have a really important role to play, though I'd say their role is part of a wider plan that you need to have in place to kind of keep yourself safe and make sure you're doing all you can to manage your epilepsy. Rather than something that people should rely on by themselves. They're not going to be an answer just by themselves, but they could be part of something bigger, of helping to keep you safe and helping you live well with your epilepsy.
Okay, so I just kind of have one last question that I've kind of experienced myself. So I know that a lot of families can have a lot of anxiety around SUDEP once they find out like their child's been diagnosed with epilepsy. So those support groups, how can they gain information or support with these kind of anxieties?
You're right, this can be a really hard topic to think about, to talk about, and to do something about, and it's unsurprising that anxiety comes alongside with it. But the fact that this podcast is happening and that hopefully people are listening, this is a step in the right direction towards living positively and as safely as possible. I feel like I'm repeating myself again, but having a good relationship with your epilepsy doctor and nurse is really important. If you're anxious, either yourself or if your family members are anxious, or if you are a family member and you're listening, having a good, honest, open chat with the epilepsy health professional in your life is really important, as they can review and adapt your medications and care as needed. They can offer advice, they can offer referrals to other services, And they can provide that reassurance. They'll have seen, they have so much experience, a wealth of experience of supporting people with epilepsy, that they'll be able to kind of draw on what they've learned over the years and offer that real life kind of experience and advice that can be really helpful in kind of calming any of the fears and answering any questions that you might have. I think speaking with others with epilepsy is also really helpful, and I know that's something that young epilepsy do brilliantly, and the kind of youth reps play a great role in that, because you can hear from people who have gone through similar things as you. You can get those tidbits and bits of advice that can maybe be something you can take forward and go, actually, well, they're doing really well, so I can do really well as well. But just remember that what works for one person might not work for you, especially when it comes to reducing risks. So it's always a bit of a take it with a pinch of salt situation when it comes with listening to advice from people who aren't health professionals. Charities such as SUDEP Action and Young Epilepsy and others can also play a role in helping answer any questions or give you reassurance if you've got any specific worries when it comes to SUDEP and epilepsy risks. So do take a look at their websites, get in contact with us, and I'm sure we'll do everything we can to help as much as possible answer your questions or concerns. And also, this is why we know that a lot of people can find SUDEP worrying, or kind of it's something that makes you feel a bit anxious because it's something that seems out of control, even though we know that there are things that you can do to reduce your risks. And that's why we hold SUDEP Action Day every year. It's an international event that epilepsy organisations across the world get involved in. And the whole point of it is to raise awareness of epilepsy risks and SUDEP, and to give people really helpful information to help people with epilepsy and their families. This year it's on October the 19th, which is Wednesday, and our theme is Talk SUDEP Now, because we know that it's really important for people to know about this information so they can make the best choices for them. And if anyone's interested in finding out a bit more, or think that might be somewhere they could go to find out, answer some of the questions or worries they have, then please do take a look at the SUDEP Action Day website, and hopefully that will give you a point in the right direction. I think, just to go back to what I've said before, I hope that listening today will hopefully give you a little bit more knowledge about SUDEP, give you a little bit of reassurance, get you thinking about those wider epilepsy safety risks and what you might be able to do to reduce them if possible, but also just to live really well with your epilepsy. By knowing what the risks are and how they might apply to you, and also what you can do to reduce them as possible, you really can have a positive impact on your epilepsy. So don't lose heart. There is help out there. We're all willing you on to try and reduce risks as much as possible. And there's lots of places out there that can offer you help and advice if you are a little bit worried or concerned.
Thanks, Sammy. This has been really, really useful. I know when I first learnt about SUDEP, it was kind of really scary, just the idea of it, because I learnt about it quite late, like after I was diagnosed. But definitely after having learnt more from you today as well, it definitely puts you at ease to know that there are things you can do to help yourself.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me. Yeah, we know that this isn't a topic that is often talked about as much as it should be, and we know that it can make people anxious. But one thing we also know is that anxiety can go away over time by learning about it, by taking those active steps. So please do find out more, get in touch if we can help in any way. And again, thank you, Annie and Young Epilepsy, for having me today.
Thank you for listening to the Channel podcast for Young Epilepsy. If you'd like more information and support with epilepsy, please visit www.thechannel.org.uk.
Together we create possible.